I dropped into the tower and stood there for a moment, looking across the courtyard. I could hear Tess talking about Fenchurch and Katie helping the other guardians with their loot. I took a deep breath and swallowed hard. Then I coughed roughly, trying to get the lump out of my throat. My life was about to get really complicated, and I wasn't sure how to feel about this. Facing emotions I thought were long resolved wasn't my strength. As a Titan, my strength is found in the power of my right hand, the load I carry upon my shoulders, and the courage in my soul to defeat the enemy in front of me, regardless of the odds. I had defeated droves of Hive, throngs of Fallen, and crushing crowds of Cabal with nothing but my gun and my light. This was an enemy I buried a long time ago that has returned to haunt my soul. There was no rock I could punch, no ogre to shoot, and no screaming, sprawling mess of death in front of me. This was the quiet darkness and nearly inaudible pain of my soul, silently wrapping its claws around my heart again, trying to drag me back into the pit of vengeance. The only way to conquer this foe was an ability I was poorly trained to implement. Forgiveness. My eyes then turned to Zavala, and my breath quickened. I jogged over and waited patiently as other guardians handled their business with him. I glanced around as the last one walked away, making sure there was no one else within earshot, and approached him. Our eyes met such that all Awoken know each other in that unspoken way. I almost saw a slight smile turn up from one corner of his mouth, yet he still greeted me like every other guardian he sees.
Guardian, what news?
I walked closer to him so that our bodies faced out toward the city, and pulled out my ghost in front of us so no other guardians could peek in. I played the hologram of my sighting of Uldren Sav. Zavala watched intently. His eyes never wavered from the projection. I could see his forehead wrinkle as the image became clearer. He may have even muttered the word no, but I couldn't quite tell. He turned back to me as the voice faded.
I had heard the rumors.
He stopped and looked up at the traveler hanging above us. Its numerous pieces floating around, almost enveloping us with a sense of security that I wanted to believe was real. But not with the darkness coming. Not after what happened with Rasputin. Then I felt his dutiful focus return. He looked at me again with strong eyes and an intentional tone.
We don't have time for petty revenge missions, Guardian. I need each and every one of us to be gathering information on these pyramids and supporting Eris. I won't authorize any official strikes in the matter.
I put Ghost away. I knew he would say that, even before I decided to tell him. He turned away slightly as he finished, and I could feel his soul aching in the way that only Awoken know each other. In the way that when one of us hurts, we all hurt in some form or another. Cade's death hurt him more than he would ever say out loud, and deeper than anyone other than fellow Awoken could feel. He looked back at me with a knowing stare. It wasn't commanding, nor was it meant to intimidate. It was one more of knowing his duty and the coming sacrifice that would be necessary to win. He had swallowed his personal feelings so many times before that maybe he fooled himself into enjoying the taste. This time, it looked like he didn't even have to try very hard.
Back to the front, Guardian.
I started to say something when another Guardian came up to him. Zavala quickly turned to her and said,
Hello, Hunter. Let's get to work.
I walked away, knowing he and I may never speak of this conversation again. Zavala was the kind of awoken that never let simple things like emotions get in the way of what needed to be done. I guess that's the perspective that comes from centuries of life experience and thousands of resurrections. Maybe someday I might understand that better. I moved on because I knew I had one more person to tell. Stepping into the energy of the bazaar and the tower was always something I enjoyed. It had so much more life than the courtyard. There, Shax was always yelling, Tess was always selling, and Rahul was always telling tales. Here, the market was where the majority of the non-Guardian population hung out. The smell of the ramen stands and the daily announcements of the coming apocalypse always energized me. I considered stopping to explain how the doomsday declarations were so wrong and tell them what was actually happening on the other planets. I never did, though. It just didn't seem like the right time to explain what really happened in the Black Garden. I don't know that I could explain what the Deep Stone Crypt was actually like for someone who didn't possess a paracausal perspective. Instead, I would play with the children who scampered around the area playfully challenging Guardians for their paper St. 14 shields or toy replicas of Ace. It gave me fleeting moments of joy to watch the pure and innocent play of children. I miss innocence sometimes. I stopped at the top of the steps and looked down at Ikora as she looked over the city. Her bookshelf was oddly unorganized, and her work table had papers haphazardly stacked all over it. They flipped gently in the breeze of the day as she stared out into the deep valley. She looked almost lost for a moment until she sensed my approach.
Quickly, friend.
I again stepped closer so we both faced the city, and pulled out my ghost with a projection so no one but us could see it. She watched it all the way through, and her face never wavered until the end, where she nodded slowly and turned to me.
My hidden and I have known about this for some time.
She knowingly whispered as she turned back to her table. She placed both hands on it and took in a slow, deep breath before turning back to me.
He seems to have a fascination with Niobe Labs we don't yet understand. As a member of the Vanguard, I cannot officially authorize any action in the matter. This is an extremely low-priority mission in the face of what we are currently dealing with.
She paused for a moment, examining me.
You already told Zavala, and he gave you the same answer, didn't you? He also gave some long-winded speech about duty and sacrifice or something.
Actually, no,
I keep forgetting about the shared awoken empathy.
She looked up at the traveler. Not the same way that Zavala did, with firm resolve and focus, but instead with eyes full of questions.
I'm sorry, Guardian. I can't help you, nor can I stop you. I owe Eris all I can give her in this endeavor with the darkness.
I could feel the pain she attempted to hide with those words. It pierced through my armor and deep into my chest to know she, too, hadn't truly resolved Cade's death for herself. It was a well-hidden weakness that I didn't know a Guardian like Ikora, with centuries of perspective, could harbor. I always believed that my own frailties would slowly melt away over time through experience. A heart forged upon the funeral pyre of battle only becomes stronger with each resurrection. At least, that was what I believed until now. I looked at her as she almost begged the traveler to take the pain of Cade's loss from her mind. I was there when Cade's light faded away for the last time. I was there when we buried him. I saw her eyes full of the centuries of knowledge and power, pleading for the release that tears of anguish bring. But she didn't let it come for some reason I couldn't fathom at the time. I could hear the silent desperate screams for justice against the Barons blowing from her soul. She couldn't just lash out in a fury of revenge. She took Cade's final death very personally. And yet, as a member of the Vanguard, she never lowered her emotional walls enough to let anyone see her grief. So I took the mantle of revenge upon myself. Uldren's sob was as much mine as it was anyone else's. I had the luxury of being able to end Uldren. I was just another light bearer on a quest. Ikora and Zavala were, and still are, icons of an ideal that bonded the rest of humanity together. They permanently set aside their personal agendas for the sake of being responsible for the survival of all the people in the last city.
But what about Cade?
She turned to me and gently put her hand on my shoulder. I could almost feel her push the pain down again as she reminded herself of the duty she bore so well. The effort it took for her to retain her steely exterior seemed immense.
Titan, I owe the living more than I owe the dead.
I nodded to her and walked away. I walked slowly back up the steps and toward the plaza, so deeply lost in my thoughts that I knocked over the maintenance frame, who always seemed to be cleaning up the same spill in the hallway. I apologized profusely, just as much to it as it did to me as I picked it up from the stone floor. I handed the mop back to it and walked away again, pondering my next move. As I passed Banshee and all the Guardians buying their daily bounties, I could hear Shax yelling about grenades again. I almost wanted to take him up on his offer to exchange punches, just so I could get this frustration and anxiety out of my heart for a moment. Maybe if my ghost rezzed me a few times, I could start forgetting what I saw back in the EDZ. I looked up from my emotional conflict to find myself staring down the stairs that lead into the hangar. The hangar. That's where I could find some clarity. I broke into a jog and headed towards St. 14. I passed Holiday and glanced quickly to where Cade used to stand, just before jumping up the stairs headed towards Saint. He was feeding his birds, like always, and greeted me with a loud, joyous hello. As I got closer, he could sense my inner turmoil.
Guardian!
His concern pierced through his helmet into my heart.
I can feel your burden. Come, share it with me, that we may carry it together.
I turned his shoulder toward his ship and away from the main hangar crowd to play the video again. He watched the whole thing through, nodding his head slowly.
This is the man who killed Cade, no?
I was surprised at Saint's question. I nodded in response. I figured I would have to explain the whole thing to him, including my part.
And you killed him in the Dreaming City, no?
I looked at Saint in surprise.
Osiris and I talk much about the events I missed when I was gone. I know all about your accomplishments with him and in the Dreaming City. I know all about the Barons. I only wish I could have fought alongside you. It would have been absolutely the best.
He let out a full belly laugh that shook me to my core. He put his arm around my shoulder and motioned to the image of Uldren.
You see, he is a guardian now. He is just like you and I. The Traveler has chosen him to be a light bearer and to stand against the darkness. But nothing, my friend. He is a guardian and knows nothing of his old life. It is our job to help him become part of our battle today. I care nothing about what the Vanguard thinks of the past. Believe me, the past is there for a reason.
Cade was...
Yes, he was. Cade was and is no longer.
Saint firmly spun me by the shoulders square to him, so my eyes were just inches from his helmet.
That man is still out there in the EDZ, my friend. The mere fact that you found him and didn't kill him says all I need to know about how you feel.
He firmly slapped my chest with an open palm.
You know in your soul that we need him. We need all Guardians to come together for humanity's survival, for our survival, for the Traveler's survival.
I looked back at this legend of a Guardian who all of us looked to as a shining example of what we should all aspire to be, and confidently nodded my head. Saint reached for his shotgun and said,
I will meet you in the EDZ. Send me the coordinates.
It was a normal patrol day in the EDZ. I rode my Sparrow through the outskirts towards Sojourner's Camp, tracking a fallen boss that had hit Crossland. Devram asked me to personally track this one down for him. I immediately agreed to follow up, as I'd taken an interest in Niobe Labs recently. The Black Armory weapon caches had always been something of interest to me, for their high-quality designs and consistently excellent craftsmanship. 801 didn't trust most Guardians, but I had cultivated enough of a relationship with her that I was given access to some classified documents with leads on new designs which I wanted to chase. I hopped off my Sparrow just short of the open encampment because I knew the Fallen liked to ambush unaware Guardians. My radar pinged a target in the distance, so I pulled out Izanagi's burden and crouched behind a crate just to get a visual on what I might be chasing before clearing out the smaller Fallen on my way to the boss. To my surprise, the camp was quiet. I even pulled out my ghost to scan for marauders, just in case any of them were cloaked, and got nothing. So I moved up closer to the single stationary ping. My instincts told me this wasn't the boss I was hunting. Fallen chieftains tended to have dregs around them to serve as meat shields against us. I kept my ghost out and ready for anything because something didn't seem right. And that's when I saw him. I had worked my way to the left of the rickety makeshift bridge that led to Niobe Labs, and on the other side was a single cloaked figure sitting on the rocks overlooking the river. He just sat there with his knees pulled up to his chest and a hood over his head so I couldn't see the hair or any distinguishing features. At first, I figured it was another hunter, merely relaxing after a tough day. Maybe he was taking in the scenery and remembering old times. Who knows? He turned to his right, pulling his cloak back just enough that I could see his hand reaching for his belt. It was then that his hood slipped enough that I caught a glimpse of his facial features looking through my scope. I saw his purple-hued skin and immediately recognized him as a fellow Awoken. But I couldn't feel any connection with him like my other cousins. He pulled his knife from his belt and began running it along the sharp rocks to refine its blade. After a few moments, he turned toward the cliffs to his left and started climbing. And that was when his hood fell completely from his head and I caught a full look at his face. It was Uldren. I froze. My eyes went distant, and my ghost asked me what was wrong.
Start recording. Link into my scope and start recording.
I refocused and began tracking Uldren up the entire face of the cliff. He climbed slowly and steadily with the sure hands and feet of a hunter. He got to the top and moved up to the highest point, where he triple jumped up to a tree and reached for something on it.
But how? This can't be real.
I cocked my 4X honed edge and sighted in again. The sound of the chamber loading with a powerful 4-round burst rang in my ears so strongly that I couldn't hear anything but my pulse quickening in my chest, my blood boiling in my head, and my teeth grinding in my mouth. It was so loud, I thought he might hear the gun loading and run away. My palms started sweating inside my gauntlets. I suddenly had more anxiety flowing through my body than any trials match I had ever been in. I started squeezing the grip of Izanagi so hard the rifle began shaking. If I didn't have good trigger discipline, the gun would have gone off. I thought this was over. I had done right by Cade. I bore the mantle of revenge for Ikora and Zavala, but mostly for myself. As much as I was probably on his fire team, he was still on my fire team. I was responsible for him, even though he was a member of the Vanguard. I had made each and every Baron pay for their part, and close that book for good. At least I thought I did. I was ready to do it all over again as I released a deep breath and tried to sight in again on Uldren. He was just sitting on the top of the cliff, looking out over the EDZ. I had a clear shot at his head, and if I took the shot, I could probably get to his ghost before he was rezzed. If I could just take the shot. My hand wouldn't move. My finger frozen in place. My eyes suddenly went blurry, and I slumped down against the crate. My rifle slipped off the side, landing gently in a bush next to me, still hissing with the cold power of the 4X honed edge loaded. Why couldn't I take the shot? Why did I freeze? I peeled my helmet off my head and tossed it aside, trying to catch the breath I had lost when I sighted him the first time. My chest was heaving, and I was sweating with a cold burn on my lips as my ghost came in close.
Guardian, he's leaving.
I looked up to see him jogging toward Niobe Labs. I scrambled for my helmet and shoved it above my head and started after him. This made no sense. How in the world did he end up here? I pulled the trigger myself. I watched his eyes go dark. As much as I hated killing a fellow Awoken, I hated losing Cade more. I was his partner. Petra and I were on his fire team. I was sure by now he had spotted me. I wasn't exactly trying to be stealthy. My noisy anxiety probably didn't help. The rocky terrain and his hunter mobility made it difficult to keep up with him. But I knew we were both headed to the same place, so it wasn't a huge priority to keep a visual on him. As we came into the dingy halls of the abandoned Niobe Labs, I stopped running and pulled out my auto rifle.
Keep recording.
I haven't stopped. Do you have any idea what's going on?
I ignored him.
Guardian.
I entered the main portion of the lab that led into the Berguzia forge. The forge door was still sealed shut, but I could hear someone inputting data into a control panel. Maybe it was to open the massive steel doors to the forge. I couldn't see which one was being used.
Uldren!
I yelled. I saw a shadow above me move left to right. I didn't hear a weapon being armed, which surprised me, so I holstered my own.
Uldren, how did you do it? How did you survive that headshot?
I don't remember the name the way everyone else does. Is that how I came to be here?
Came a mild voice after a short pause.
Guardian, I'm sensing light here. Light that isn't mine.
The Traveler is an interesting being.
The voice said. I could feel it getting closer and moving behind me.
It only poses questions to us, never really answering. You feel it too, don't you, cousin?
I spun around as a figure stepped from the shadows behind me. It was Uldren. We stood there for a few seconds. I could see him trying to figure out why he almost recognized me. As if there was a faded echo of an old decision bouncing around his head that he couldn't quite hear. We stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably a few seconds. My mind raced in circles, yet I never felt the need to draw my weapon. I was more curious than anything else right now. I could sense him sizing me up, trying to find the threads to piece together the picture in his mind of the blurry memory that had momentarily brushed against his consciousness. It was almost like he was looking through the stained glass window of the past, trying to build a 1,000-piece puzzle with only 2 edge pieces. He turned away for a moment and then looked back at me.
Who answers the questions the Traveler poses?
I furrowed my brow in confusion at his query, but I decided to entertain the thought.
We do. That's why the Traveler chooses us.
Then his brow furrowed.
But what if I don't understand the question? Who helps me understand the questions better?
That was the job of the speaker. But we don't have one anymore. Not after the Red War.
The Red War?
His face twisted as if searching his mind for that wisp of a lost memory again. He sounded almost innocent. This made no sense to me. He was there. The Sovs watched as we Guardians lost our light and got it back. I couldn't lie to myself any longer. He was really chosen by the Traveler. My ghost finally spoke up and broke the tenuous silence.
Why are you here in Niobe Labs?
I need the weapons from this forge. With the forges being shut down soon, I've been collecting schematics and selling them back to Ada for supplies, armor, and other necessities.
You've been back to the tower?
Multiple times. Ada pays well. Even better than that rat drifter. All he wants are those stupid motes of light and dark. Little man has no idea what he's playing with.
I still needed one more thing from him.
Where's your ghost?
He opened his hand in front of me, and his ghost appeared.
We've cracked about 85% of the files here. This little light's been quite helpful.
Hello.
Hello.
I know darkness is coming.
Uldren said, putting his ghost away.
But if the Vanguard feels anywhere close to what the general human population does about me, I can't show my face in the tower. Will you help me, cousin?
He put his hand on my shoulder. That's when our connection clicked. I began to feel our awoken bond reforming in a way that just intensified my inner turmoil. He killed Cade. He took the light away from a fellow Guardian. Then I killed him. It was supposed to be simple. Then the Traveler went and complicated everything. Uldren was here for a reason. Why? What am I supposed to do with him? Why does the light always feel like the overbearing parent constantly teaching you lessons you don't need or want? How am I supposed to grow my strength in the light if I'm stopping to ponder the cosmic reasons behind events in my life? I'm not a warlock. Books are something I use as a coaster for my drink. I'm a Titan. We do the heavy lifting and make fun of the hunters who have to be sneaky and stealthy in order to accomplish anything meaningful. Yet here I am, attempting to answer questions like I'm a professor in a Paracausal Philosophy 101 class. School is not in session, and I'm no teacher. I'm a soldier on the front line of a war that has yet to begin in earnest. If Zavala had ever taught me anything, it was that the time wasted on these matters of the heart were distractions from our ultimate purpose as Guardians. And yet, I could see how neglecting those matters had driven both Zavala and Ikora apart, and away from the light. It was a truly insidious disease, disguising itself as courage and strength while slowly eating us away from within. I had to find it in me to forgive him. Somehow and some way, I had to forgive him. That realization shook me harder than a thunder crash into Morgath. But the truth was something I never shied away from in any situation. I looked into his eyes. Deep, deep into his eyes. I saw nothing of the old pain and rage he possessed. The burning rage that unleashed the full force of the Barons and shook the Vanguard to its very core was no longer there. I looked harder, trying to find any reason to rekindle that burning fire of vengeance once more. I had undertaken many missions that were based solely on payback, but the fire from this one had long since faded. There was no more anger to feed it. There was not a hint of the smug arrogance that infuriated me each time I thought of him. I saw nothing of the awoken bastard that killed my friend. I saw a cousin who needed my help. He knew the darkness was coming, and was trying in his own way to contribute. Zavala once told me that self-mastery is really the one true path that the Traveler has for us. That everything else was only a distraction. This was right after we rezzed, following his smashing a group of new Guardians with his fists of havoc. It was a lesson that was never lost on me. Perhaps it was because I felt it differently than most, because of who said it.
This will take some work.
The jump back to the tower from the ETZ seemed to take longer than normal. Maybe it was just my anxiety bubbling up again.
You know Zavala will say when he finds out you didn't show him the entire recording, don't you?
I turned to her and said,
For the last time, stop lecturing me. This is the right thing to do.
The entire flight back, my ghost just rambled on and on about how I didn't understand the ramifications of what was going to happen. She just prattled over and over about how this would split the entire population.
But
This world needs more forgiveness and less condemnation. Less tribal BS and more cooperation. It's bad enough I have to listen to the dead orbit and new monarchy garbage in the tower from the civilians. And then there's the future war cult with the never-ending warnings about the coming apocalypse.
I
grabbed the little light and shoved it into a compartment under my seat and slammed the drawer shut.
I said shut up!
Guardian, we're dropping soon.
I'm right there with you, Saint.
I replied resolutely. I was prepared for whatever would happen. Even if it meant violating the no combat order, I was fully armed and ready to stand my ground. The little light was rattling under my seat. I could feel her growing frustration as she attempted to get out of the small space I had unceremoniously shoved her into. So I yanked open the drawer and she floated out.
I'm sorry.
So am I.
The plan was to have all three of us drop in and quickly move towards Zavala so as to draw as little attention as possible. It was going to escalate quickly. We just weren't sure in what manner. I don't think Saint fully understood what he was getting himself into. His strolls into the courtyard and through the bazaar would always draw crowds of civilians and guardians. They wanted to hear his confident voice assuring them and calming the constant fear in the air. Not too many ever ventured into the hangar. Holiday didn't like the random civilians wandering around her equipment and disrupting her crew as they performed their duties. She always got a little peeved when Zord would seemingly pop up out of nowhere. The extra foot traffic was distracting her smooth-running operation. But that's why I needed him, why we all needed him. Now, more than ever. The transmat dropped all three of us into the courtyard, and before I could even take a step, Saint called out to Zavala.
Zavala!
He yelled with all the subtlety of Actium war rig and sweet business in a crucible match.
Come. We must speak.
Saint's booming voice immediately turned every eye onto us, and the murmuring started. He was definitely a fellow Titan. You could easily tell by the subtlety with which he handled delicate situations like this one. Why was Saint out of the hangar? Why was he yelling at Zavala? I could hear the murmurings from the gathering crowd of people. Fortunately, Uldren had smartly left his helmet on. He slid behind me, only glancing over my shoulder to momentarily assess the growing crowd. The vibe was still positive. Then Zavala made his way to us.
Saint,
he said calmly, putting his hands behind his back in an official-looking stance.
What brings you to the courtyard today? Does Lord Shax have you recruiting for the trials matches again?
That's when Lord Shax parted the group with his booming voice.
Saint 14, it's always good to see you. Come, let us get a drink together. There is a new...
Saint cut him off.
Not today, my friend. I have more pressing matters, but I am glad you're here.
He turned back to Zavala, who was growing impatient with the distraction from his regular duties.
Zavala, I know you need all Guardians on deck to face the darkness. So, I have brought another to support our cause.
Saint turned and pulled Uldren from behind me. He flipped Uldren's helmet off his head and threw his arm around Uldren's narrow shoulders, shaking him with a hearty hug. Both of them looked back at Zavala as he bent down to pick up the helmet on the cement floor. When Zavala made eye contact with Uldren, his hands clenched around the helmet in his grasp, crushing it like a flimsy soda can. Zavala's eyes seemed to glaze over, and I could feel the rage bubbling up in him. The very next sound that rattled in my ears was the collective clicking of bullets in chambers and safeties releasing. This wasn't going to end well. Thank the Traveler that Lord Shax was in the middle of it all.
Guardians! This is a non-combat zone. Stow your weapons immediately.
He looked sternly at the crowd.
Immediately means now!
Saint stepped forward to Lord Shax.
Thank you, my friend. I wasn't planning on fighting everyone today.
You're welcome. I'm sure everyone here would love an explanation. Wouldn't you agree, Zavala?
Indeed.
Came Zavala's reply through clenched teeth.
Please, enlighten us, Saint.
Saint stepped forward and away from Uldren, who had remained surprisingly calm throughout this entire ordeal. Maybe it was his innocent nature shining through again. I couldn't tell through the sound of the blood pounding behind my eyes. After hearing Shax control a mob of unruly guardians with just his voice, I started reassessing his standing offer to trade punches.
My fellow Guardians, we know what is coming. We see the escalating conflict on Io, Mercury, Titan, and Mars. We feel the darkness creeping into our souls. It comes to take our light and our hope. It comes for us at our very core, seeding through our thoughts with doubt and fear. It knows what we dread and our very weaknesses. The darkness seeks to exploit the uncertainty of our journey with the light by answering the questions we have with sweeping assurity. We also know what this man did to us.
He pointed at Uldren.
He took our hope and our peace. He stole some of our innocence from us. All of us know it. Every guardian, every citizen who walks, every creature that breathes knows what happened in the tangled shore that day. Everyone. Except him.
Saint paused and looked around at the group. He looked back at Shax and over to Zavala. Zavala held the crushed helmet in one hand at his side as he took in Saint's words.
He is of the light now. He is chosen by the Traveler just as we are. He doesn't yet know why or how, but he is chosen to wield the light just like all of us, and find out for himself why the Traveler brought him to this place at this time.
I glanced over my shoulder to see Holiday standing at the top of the stairs that led to the hangar. Word had spread quickly, and everyone came out to find what had captivated the tower today.
We need all the Guardians we can bring together to fight the coming battle. We need all who are willing to stand for the light against the darkness. So I, Saint 14, do stand with this Guardian. And I call on all Guardians to stand with me this day, united, for our common goal.
The silence resounded around the courtyard like a bolt of thunder. There were no whispers, no chatting, nothing. Not even the birds were fluttering about. Just the silence of the Traveler, hovering voiceless above us all. I looked around at my fellow Guardians to gauge their reaction to Saint's speech. It was a rousing, passionate one because Saint knew no other way to be. I guess that's why we all adored him so much. I watched a few hunters call their ships into transmat range and quickly depart. Not sure what that meant, but most hunters were more about the Crucible than anything else. Perhaps they didn't wish to incur the anger of Lord Shax any more than they already had. Besides, if Uldren's presence didn't interfere with the amount of loot they could gain, most likely this would be the last I saw of them. The few warlocks in the crowd put away their weapons and looked on with deep intent, almost as if they were internally reciting lore in an attempt to reconcile this whole event in some cosmic, intellectual way. My fellow Titans stood silent, mostly nodding at me as they walked away. Of all the Guardians, I knew my brothers and sisters would be the ones most likely to understand my actions. Some may not like what I had done, but there was a respect among us that action always engendered. I'm certain there would be many conversations to be had, but at a much later date. Zavala broke the silence with his calm, diplomatic demeanor.
Saint, could I have a word? In private.
Of course, of course. Lord Shax, would you escort my friend and the Guardian to a, shall we say, less public place?
Of course.
Shax raised his hand, waving over the group of redjacks that routinely helped him administer Crucible matches from his spot in the tower. 7 of them made their way through the dispersing crowd and formed a circle around Shax, Uldren, and myself. I watched Saint walk towards Zavala and take him by the hip. Zavala threw me a glare just before turning and walking with Saint to his standard perch overlooking the city. The Redjacks escorted us past Banshee and down the stairs from the courtyard. The initial crowd of Guardians had mostly dispersed after Saint gave his speech. The remaining civilian population, however, still gathered around as we made our way. The general chatter started to increase in volume as we made our way past all the vendors. Cade had made many friends in the bazaar over time, with his excursions into remote areas for special materials. His exploits were legendary, and his humor always made for a good story. I could feel the usual positive, vibrant tone of the area begin shifting. The vendors were not happy with what they saw and heard from Saint. Some of them began making catcalls and hooting at us as we moved. I was standing to Uldren's left, just behind him, when something flew past my head and bounced off the wall. A warm, smelly liquid splattered all over the wall and floor. That was the breaking point. The air quickly filled with cursing, screaming, and more projectiles. The civilians made it very clear they didn't want Uldren anywhere near them. I could see Lord Shax become slightly more annoyed than usual at this sudden change in the tone of the bazaar. He rarely comes down here, and now I understood why. Since he was the biggest target, nearly everything was coming at him from every direction imaginable. I looked up to see Soraya Hawthorne leap down from her perch above it all and start pulling vendors away from the group. She screamed at those she knew and began smacking those she didn't, with anything she could reach.
What the bloody hell did you stir up this time, Guardian? You just never quit, do you?
I don't need a lecture, Soraya. Not today.
The Redjacks responded to the increased threat level by forming a barrier between the civilians and Uldren. I grabbed him by his collar and pulled him down the stairs toward where Ada was. It was the simplest solution I could come up with, because I could control access through the tight hallway. Lord Shax must have thought the same thing, because I could hear his thundering steps behind me as I pushed Uldren down the long hall of empty stores toward the annex. I started down the second set of steps and nearly fell over the drifter just standing there, flipping his coin.
Hey, hero. Looks like you...
Lord Shax grabbed the top of Drifter's tiny head with his massive hands.
Continue on, Guardian. I'll be there shortly after I get our little friend here to help me with crowd control.
He pushed the Drifter up the stairs.
This is going to take more than just me yelling at people, little man.
I guided Uldren into the Black Armory room. I glanced behind me to make sure no one had broken through the line, when I heard Uldren's voice.
Hello again, Ada. I know you weren't expecting to see me so soon.
Uldren.
They hugged. Odd.
Guardian. What's going on?
It's time. It's time for the change.
Well, I suppose sooner is better than later.
Is anyone ever ready for anything the Traveler asks us to do?
I was taken aback by his calm, contemplative tone. Again, no rage. No seething anger at anything. I still couldn't get over his innocence in the face of all of this. It was almost as if, because the Traveler wiped his mind of all previous memories, such that the pure light of spending so much time alone with his thoughts, that the Traveler had turned him into a small, curious child. The deep, resounding voices of Saint and Shax echoing from the hall snapped me out of my trance.
Guardian! What a day!
He hugged me hard, and then smacked Shax in the chest.
Well done, my old friend.
Ada quickly interrupted.
Gentlemen, I cannot have a Titan reunion party in this armory. There isn't enough glimmer in all the city to replace all the things you will break.
Shax nodded his head.
Of course, of course. Saint, we shall talk soon.
Saint turned to me.
Guardian, I just spoke with Zavala, and, well...
His voice trailed off.
He's not having any of this, is he?
No, he's not.
Saint put his hands on his hips and shook his head slowly.
He calls this a distraction from our goals at the moment. I said to him, Zavala, we must heal ourselves before we can fight anyone. Then he said, Saint, I cannot abide this diversion from the path we have before us. I need you to return to your place in the hangar and continue training guardians in the trials, and this foolishness must cease.
Saint paused and looked at Uldren. He put his hand on Uldren and turned to me.
The trials are being used less and less, my friend. Guardians are more concerned with getting their loot and chasing ghosts of lost battles.
Was Saint losing his confidence? I almost heard self-doubt in his voice. That feeling was quickly squashed.
I care too much about this city and these people to just stand here and let this opportunity pass us by.
He turned back to Uldren and pointed at him with a stern finger.
The Vanguard must stand united as one if we are to fight the darkness. And you will be that catalyst.
Saint, you can't be serious. Are you saying...
Yes, my friend. We need a new Hunter Vanguard. I don't care if Zavala likes it or not. I don't care what the civilians may say at first.
He walked over to me and slapped both hands onto my shoulders, pulling himself close to me.
Let's treat this wound, Guardian. Let's push the city forward under one banner, with one voice.
He pulled Uldren over to us.
One banner, one voice. It's time to heal.
Uldren agreed to return to the EDZ for a few days, while Saint handled the tower. I had some patrol duties on Titan and Io, as well as crucible work to put in for the coming weekend of trials. So my presence in the tower would be spotty at best. Saint laughed heartily and we parted ways. Uldren quickly transmatted to his ship, then Saint retired to the hangar. I'm sure with plenty of new stories to tell. As I watched Uldren's ship jump to orbit from the back annex platform, it was clear that this would get worse before it got better. There were several lingering issues to overcome, and I still had to face Zavala again. I walked back toward the main part of the tower, pondering my place in all of this, when I passed near Ikora. I stopped near the top of the stairs again, in full sight of her watchful gaze.
What can you teach me today, Titan?
I didn't feel the same sense of betrayal from Ikora that I got from Zavala after the events in the courtyard today. She looked upon me with a face I had not seen in a while. I could see the conflict within her as a member of the Vanguard. As she was responsible for the safety and well-being of the city, this meant what happened earlier was irresponsible and dangerous. I had caused a major disruption to the necessary preparations that were happening. While at the same time, I could see a sense of relief in her. She also believed that Cade's death had lingered long enough in our collective consciousness. We enacted our revenge. We got our justice. But we didn't actually grieve, nor address any of the core problems that resulted from it.
I too owe the living more than I owe the dead.
She nodded slowly and turned to the city.
Yes, you do.
She turned back to her desk and collected some papers.
Come, Titan. Let us speak with Zavala together.
We walked up the steps toward the courtyard. As we approached Banshee, I could see the immense figure of Lord Shax in front of the gunsmith with his arms folded.
Ikora Ray, you look refreshed.
Hello, Lord Shax. You look out of place.
True. I should be officiating matches, but I was inspired today. Inspired by someone who took bold steps.
He then turned his head to me.
Could I have a word, Titan?
He turned back to Ikora.
If you aren't pressed for time, of course.
I'll see you shortly, friend.
She patted me gently on the back and headed down the stairs behind Banshee to Zavala's office.
Walk with me.
We climbed the stairs to where Lord Saladin would normally be overlooking the city and watching the Iron Banner matches. He stopped at the top of Saladin's dais and looked over the city lights below in the twilight.
Tell me, Titan, do you ever doubt yourself?
I looked up at Lord Shax. I thought I would give him the standard response of never, but I caught myself.
All the time.
Good. I can't count the number of Guardians who lie to me about that. Look at the city, Guardian. Isn't it beautiful?
I didn't see the city. I only saw the Traveler hovering over it all.
But you don't see it, because that innocent beauty is also a lie, isn't it?
He then turned his head to me.
I see that you take my advice to heart, that all battles are just a lesson. Everyone hears it, but few understand it. They think the battle is out there somewhere in the next Lost Sector treasure chest or some exotic quest. Tell me one more thing before you go. Do you know why you are a Titan?
Yes, I do.
I turned and walked down the steps toward the courtyard. It was time to speak with Zavala. The door to Zavala's office was cracked open, and a sliver of light spilled onto the dark path in front of me. I could hear murmuring from inside the room between Ikora and Zavala. No clear words, but the tone was subdued. I didn't knock. I just pushed the door open and walked right in. They both stood near the window that looked out to the city. Ikora held her papers close to her chest with both arms, and Zavala was in his usual official-looking posture, with his hands behind his back. They turned when I entered.
Guardian.
Could I have a word with Zavala, please?
She raised her eyebrows and looked back at Zavala, who nodded to her.
Good night, to both of you.
She gave me a sideways look and grinned as she exited the room. The door clicked shut, and I turned back to Zavala. He was not happy.
I suppose you think you've done something brave and bold here today.
No, I did what I thought was right. There's a difference.
I told you not to follow up on this. I told you we have more pressing matters.
You told me you couldn't authorize any official strikes. That's exactly what came out of your mouth.
I could tell this insubordination was starting to irk him.
Don't even pretend that I don't know about your rotating Black Ops crew. Your off-the-record strikes in the Dreaming City.
He stood up straighter as the frustration grew into anger. I stepped closer to his desk as he pointed his finger at me.
I give the Guardians a wide berth to pursue their own goals as long as the city stays safe. What you did today puts all of our efforts in jeopardy, and I won't have it.
Don't lecture me, Zavala. I stood by the Vanguard when the Drifter tried to poison us.
I leaned closer to him as our eyes locked. My nose was a few inches from his as I continued.
I bought into the rhetoric when Osiris challenged Rasputin. I have earned the space to do what I think is right for us to be stronger.
No, you haven't.
He slammed his fist onto his desk, sending documents flying everywhere.
What we need right now is for Guardians and civilians alike to have faith in the Traveler. Faith in the Vanguard, even if that might seem false at the moment. When you turned Saint 14 against us, that's where you lost every bit of cachet you thought you had.
Faith? That was his justification for avoiding all of this?
Faith? You want to talk about faith? Faith in a being who bestows powers upon us with no real idea how to use them? The Traveler is an absentee landlord who is no better than Marasov. Yes, damn it. I just said that, and I'm not one bit sorry. I can still be a loyal subject and question the leadership shown to me. I can still have faith in a silent white ball of light in the sky and be skeptical of its motives.
I didn't flinch a bit as my voice became firmer.
I can still doubt everything because I know what I am doing is right. Right by Cade, right by me, and most of all, right by the people we protect.
I stood back and pointed out the window.
Look at you, standing in front of that window silently praying to a god that has grown bored with us. And why? Because it has no voice.
Zavala stood back up and away from the desk, narrowing his eyes at me. I could see I struck a chord.
Ever since the Red War, we have no one to take our fears to, no one to offer solace in our times of doubt, no gentle voice of peace and calm in the face of constant turmoil. When the speaker died, we lost our only real visual connection to the Traveler. We lost that someone to help us define sacrifice and devotion for each and every one of us. Even if in our core we felt the tiny whispers telling us it was fake most of the time, we fooled ourselves into believing it. And now what do we have? Doubt, division, anger, constant conflict on all sides, while we Guardians stand in the midst of it all, trying to help others and quell their own doubts and fears.
I stepped back into his desk and bumped it hard.
And our own questions go unanswered! Did that rock in space ever really answer the why of Cade's death? No. We didn't get one because there was no speaker to give us the consoling words. No one around to speak softly to our screams and extinguish the fire that came from losing him. I watched Cade die. I watched his light fade because I wasn't fast enough to get to him, to help him.
I lowered my head and swallowed my own tears, nearly choking on the bitter taste.
So here we are, left to our own devices, bestowed with immortality and superpowers from a mute deity.
I turned back to him again, and I could feel something within him. Something I hadn't expected, but I did expect his next words.
Get out of my sight. Get out of the tower, and don't come back. I cannot abide insubordination from a Guardian in general.
He lowered his tone to a simmering, rage-filled hiss with a burning fury kindled by the perception of treason.
But to have it come from a fellow Awoken and from someone as honored as you, it scars my soul to the very core to know I cannot trust one of my own kind.
I left the tower immediately, without even talking to Ikora. I had planned on talking to her, but a small part of me felt betrayed by her. Like she somehow participated in that whole thing in some devious way that warlocks do with these things. A bigger piece of me knew that wasn't true. I didn't plan to stay away from the tower at all after my run in trials. I could simply wear my helmet and be another anonymous face in the crowd. It worked for Uldren, so it should work for me. Even if Zavala did somehow recognize me as a fellow Awoken, he'd never bring it up in public for fear of inciting the crowd again. I decided to spend the night on Europa. The quarters I set up near Elsie would give me enough distance from the tower and privacy to rest. The next morning, I headed out to Titan to get my daily patrols done. Everything went off well, and the run and gun distracted me enough to keep my mind off of what was about to happen between Saint and Zavala. I jumped back to orbit from a patrol on Titan headed toward the tower. My ghost had been unusually silent today, so I called her out on it.
What are you not telling me? You usually give me a bunch of updates and information about enemy movements as we patrol.
She looked away for a moment. My little light was troubled by something.
Guardians and civilians in the tower have been protesting all day. Some are swarming Zavala, and some are clogging up the hangar, yelling at Saint.
Yep. It was getting worse before it got better. I just didn't think it would go this far.
Tell Holiday I'm sorry, and that I'm on my way.
It took longer than usual to transmat into the tower. I circled on the landing pattern for several minutes, just stewing in my anxiety over what I was walking into. The apparent chaos of the courtyard made it difficult to raise anyone to clear my landing. I transmatted into a pit of screaming and flying objects with my helmet on, prepared for the worst, and found it to be just as bad as I thought. Mechanical parts and crumpled paper and resentful yelling littered the area, making it nearly impossible to get around and accomplish anything. I could see the guards struggling to hold a perimeter around Banshee. They were keeping people from using the stairs behind his shop and storming Zavala's office. He wasn't in his normal spot in the tower as a result of all the protesting. There was yelling, chanting, and a sea of signs being waved around. I made out something about Zavala failing to honor the Vanguard dare. I knew there was nothing communicated like that between Uldren and Cade. In fact, Cade hated the Sovs for what happened with the Caleb Kings. Uldren went nuts trying to convince everyone that he was getting visions from his sister, and Petra put him in prison to protect Uldren from himself and everyone else. Then Varric got involved in creating the Scorn, and that was what led to Cade getting killed. I turned and ran to the hangar. As I approached, another growing area of noise and confusion washed over me. I could see Holiday seated way up high on some scaffolding with her arms folded. She saw me entering the hangar and yelled at me.
This is all your fault, you blue-haired idiot.
I looked over at Saint's position in the hangar to see a crowd surrounding him, chanting and stomping something about treason and betrayal. There were broken maintenance frames all over the area. This was actually worse than I thought. Surprisingly, Saint was rather calm. He was sitting on the steps to his jump ship, probably wishing he could tend to his birds and talk about trials. The ruckus had scared them all away. There were some guardians in the crowd, but they kept their distance, knowing how powerful Saint was if he ever decided to put an end to this silliness. I pulled off my helmet and pushed my way through the crowd, trying to figure out what we would do next. I knew I had to step in and handle this, with Lord Shax protecting Zavala and Banshee from those protesters. They were numbered around 50 or 60, and were spaced around Saint in a semicircle, yelling and chanting over and over. Just as I got through the group, a blonde-haired Flash jumped in front of me, wildly waving an arc welder and wearing a safety visor, throwing around all the piss and vinegar of a boss fed up with people disrupting her workspace.
All right. I'm completely over this stupidity.
She waved the electric wand around in front of her, pushing the crowd back.
If I don't see all my crew back at their posts in 30 seconds, I'ma weld some butt cracks shut and pound some heads. And all you civvies can get the hell out of my hangar.
The crowd was completely taken aback with this display of frustration and venom. Saint stood up and calmly walked over to us.
Thank you, Miss Holiday. I was growing weary of all this noise.
She shut down the arc welder and yanked the visor from her head. Amanda Holiday was a loyal soldier of the Vanguard. Her courage and fighting spirit was that of legend even among the Guardians. What came out of her mouth next was more than I ever expected from her.
And you two. God damn it. I have had enough of this stupid windmill tilting.
She wiped her sweaty brow and turned back toward the group across the hangar watching this go down.
Y'all got 10 seconds left before the ass whooping starts. Guardian, I like you. But don't think for 1 second that just because you got your old chaperone that I'ma just sit by and watch you tear apart this place for some silly redemption quest.
Miss Holiday.
And you.
Amanda pulled another rag from her back pocket and slapped Saint in the chest with it.
I got guardians running in and out of this place at all hours, chasing bounties and loot for trials and distracting my work. It's bad enough that octopus-faced alien shows up out of nowhere giving away more pointless exotic gear to lazy guardians.
Amanda, I'm sorry about...
No, you're not!
She yelled back. She stopped and looked at me again. Suddenly, her face softened.
And that's the part of the reason I like you. You stand for something.
She looked back at her crew, milling about, pretending to work while trying to overhear what she was saying.
Look, I miss K2, and I wish we could move forward and not fight about silly stuff. I may not be a guardian like y'all, but I know when people hurt. I know that we gotta work together. Because we're all we have left.
Amanda was truly a strong woman with a heart of gold, who always wore it on her sleeve. She turned back to Saint, pointing a finger into the middle of his chest.
I'm not disrespecting no one here, but you gotta fix this. Make this right with Zavala. I don't care what it takes. Maybe do whatever Titans do, and have some punching contest or something. I don't know. What I do know is that we're running out of time, and we all gotta be on the same page soon, or there won't be a damn thing left of this system.
She turned back to me and patted me on the cheek.
Go get him, Tiger.
She then whipped around and started walking back to her shop area, yelling again.
What did I say about those spinner racks, huh? Did I stutter? Get your sorry ass off my bench. The only thing your backside should be touching is a chair in your house at dinner time. Now get those grease guns clean and organized before I start to lose my temper.
Come, Guardian. Let us end this.
As we climbed the steps from the hangar to the courtyard, Zavala's voice boomed over the general clamor of what I had left. It looked like he finally had enough and was quelling this uprising. That is, until Saint and I were spotted by the crowd. Then the debris started flying again. Broken maintenance frames, garbage, yelling, screaming, all permeated the air in an instant. I was starting to think we would have to break the no combat rule. Until Shax did it for us. With a crash and flash of arc energy, Shax landed with his ground bound in the center of the courtyard. Everyone and everything flew back several feet. The sparks cleared the air, revealing no serious injuries other than the pride of a few disabled guardians. Shax rose from the hissing concrete with his voice full of frustration and disappointment as the air sparked and crackled around him.
This ends now! Saint 14, Zavala!
Saint stood tall and walked up to his friend. Shax held his hand up to Saint as words started to come out.
I'm done listening to you, my friend. It's time for action.
Zavala walked up to Shax with clenched fists at his side, but otherwise collected.
I agree. The only way Uldren Sov is a member of the Vanguard is over my lightless body. Saint 14, you might have the goodwill of many on your side, but you are not a member of any ruling authority that I answer to. The time for calm diplomacy is over.
Zavala, I do not wish to fight you. I wish to unify the people behind us all. The people respect you for your loyalty and dedication to the Traveler. You are the face of their faith, the voice of calm for them. I am willing to stand with you in the Vanguard and be another voice for our common goals.
Zavala stopped and cocked his head to one side. Unfortunately, I ended up in his line of sight, and I forgot to put my helmet back on. I saw his fists squeeze tighter, and his brow furrowed deeply as he finally decided to publicly confront this challenge to his authority. Shax stepped between the advancing Saint and Zavala.
It seems as though we've reached an impasse. I shall clear the Crucible after the next round of matches. It's time for the two of you to handle this Titan to Titan.
You cannot be serious, my old friend.
I cannot abide the growing tensions in the tower. You two started this. Are you prepared to see it through to the brutal end?
All I want is for Zavala to be who the people need him to be. You have their trust and faith, and that's more important right now than anything else. We must heal from Cade's death. We must move forward with a fully intact Vanguard and a speaker as a unifying voice.
Saint stopped and looked around with his hands out to his side, palms up, amazed that no one could comprehend the truth he spoke. He was almost pleading with Zavala not to fight. I glanced up to see Ikora standing above it all, where Saladin would be. I could sense Saint had resigned himself to the inevitable conclusion of our quest. He dropped his hands to his sides and nodded. He and Zavala would need to just have this out as warriors, and as titans. Word spread quickly. Soon the tower was brimming with guardians and civilians, all trying to get a good seat for the biggest crucible match anyone had ever seen. The duel between Lord Shax versus Ikora was more of a legendary story than anything else these days. Maybe there were a few guardians left who were there, but those people were nowhere near the tower today. Every screen in the tower was tuned to the coming battle. Guardians gathered around Eververse and Katie like never before. The food shops in the bazaar were suddenly doing record business and running out of food. I stood near where Lord Shax would normally be officiating the day's crucible matches, looking out over the city. Some of the remaining Redjacks stared at their screens and pads, preparing for the coming match. I could feel a different buzz from the city and tower. This was the breaking point for most people. We had lived in a constant tense state of preparing for the unknown. We had no idea what the darkness had planned in the coming months. They drew closer to Titan, Mars, Mercury, and Io. They sent their marionettes to war with us. It didn't matter how many times I ran through the Garden of Salvation. I never found any new answers. Maybe I was looking in the wrong place, but I always felt drawn back there. My thoughts were interrupted when Ikora walked up.
I see they chose Vostok. At least it's far enough away from the civilians that no one will get hurt.
She continued as she grasped the railing next to me. I looked over to her, not quite sure what to say, and I was surprised at what I saw. Ikora seemed less content now than in recent memory. I wasn't sure if she was happy or sad or mad, but I could feel a coming tidal wave of pent-up emotion from her. The screen buzzing to life behind me snapped me out of the trance. Lord Shax's booming voice shook our bodies even miles away and through a TV screen. Shax stood in the middle of Saint and Zavala. The two combatants stared intently at each other through their helmets. In the background, you could see the towering peaks of Vostok with the buildings and walkways of the arena all around.
Saint 14! Zavala!
Shax looked back and forth at each of them.
You have agreed to a no weapons, no time limit, and no score limit. The first one to yield will be declared the victor.
Shax turned and leapt up to the highest point above what was point A in a regular control match. He could see the B point from his position. Saint looked up at Shax, and as he went back to Zavala, he was met with a large fist to his face that sent him flying back through the wall around Point A. It was on. The match went back and forth for a considerable amount of time. Neither warrior would go on a kill streak of any significance. They traded blows and kills for what seemed like an hour. Back and forth. Over and over, they beat each other with their fists and shoulder charges and supers. They flew around the mountain like eagles and then dove at each other, stalking their prey. At one point, they had worked their way around the map and back near Shax. He stood above it all with his arms folded, never flinching at the devastation around him. The shockwaves of two massive titans destroying buildings and rock formations was nothing new to him. He remained motionless in the face of it all, with all eyes on the battle in front of them. The crowds in the tower roared back and forth at the action. They had never seen such power on display, and such ferocity of devotion from two guardians in the Crucible. Then something shifted. Perhaps I was the only one who saw it, but Shax dropped his arms to his side and started walking across the roof toward the cave opening near Point B. Saint and Zavala were locked in a wrestling match at that moment on a bridge to the main building. The next thing anyone sees is a flash of light and a massive thunder crash on top of the two combatants, instantly killing both of them. The tower suddenly grew quiet. All the cheering instantly stopped as the air crackled again with powerful surges of electricity. The wood bridge smoked as the singed wood creaked under the massive load of the Crucible Overseer. It had been weakened from carrying all the weight of battle. Lord Shax grabbed both ghosts and leapt back up to Point B, where he let Saint and Zavala both resurrect themselves. They stood there silently for a moment, looking at Lord Shax.
Enough! This petty squabbling is pointless!
Zavala turned back to Saint, ready to fight on. Saint took a slight step back and lowered his shoulders, ready for more. Shax stepped between them and shoved Saint further back down the steps. Zavala grabbed Shax by the horn on his helmet and pulled him aside and charged after Saint. This blatant disrespect was something Shax hadn't faced in a long time, even from Zavala. I heard an audible gasp from the tower crowd. They just saw a side of Zavala that had never surfaced before. The side of a man who bore the weight of the survival of the human race for so long that he was about to break under the stress of it all. Zavala stood back up, ready to end this battle, when he saw Saint kneeling at the bottom of the front steps. He charged at Saint with all the pent-up fury that he held in his heart. The betrayal of Uldren burned his soul deeply. But the loss of Cade hurt more. I looked over at Ikora as Zavala charged in. She lowered her head and covered her eyes as Zavala connected with a shield bash, sending Saint flying across the arena toward Point C. His limp body ragdolled against what was left of the wood structure. The crowd in the tower erupted in a loud chorus of boos. Even those who had previously been protesting Saint in the hangar were expressing their deep scorn for what had happened. Why Saint chose to kneel and be attacked like that, they couldn't comprehend. This wasn't the Saint 14 we all knew and loved. He had relented. He had yielded in the face of combat. Zavala charged after Saint's body. Saint had rezzed and was again kneeling just beyond Point C, waiting for Zavala to find him. Zavala rushed in and grabbed Saint by the collar and flung him off the cliffside into the cavern below. He stood there for a few seconds, watching the body fall through the mist. After losing sight of the body, Zavala glanced at his hands, and then up to the traveler as if he was asking the question one more time. Again, no answer came. He grunted and charged toward Point A, where Saint was waiting again. Zavala charged toward a kneeling Saint 14, screaming and growling louder and louder as he approached. Zavala hit Saint again with the full force of a shield bash, sending Saint's lifeless corpse through the stone wall to the path below. Zavala's screaming turned into gasping, and then into the shrieking realization of what was happening around him. Wails of despair bubbled up to the surface. The roar of years of bitterly swallowed anger poured out of his soul and into the mountain air. He flung his helmet away and cried like a Titan would, with loud screeches of lost fire team members fueling his sorrow. The loss of his silly friend Cade igniting the burning pain of the final death. It was more than he could bear. Zavala pounded the stone foundation of the building that was at one time Point A. Over and over, he slammed his bloody fists into the rocks. Pieces of the building flew up and around him as the gazebo lost its integrity and crumbled. Now it was a roofless husk of a structure that creaked and yawed alongside this heavily burdened soul, finally letting it all out. With the fury of 1 million burning mauls, Zavala cried to the traveler like he had always wanted to, like he never let himself feel before. He lived for the city, and he would die for it. He is a Titan, meant to protect those who can't protect themselves. Why wouldn't the traveler just answer him this one time? The pounding stopped, and the dust began settling. The sobs of a broken heart had subsided for the moment, when a small light shone through the cloudy sky and onto Zavala's chest. He leaned back, spent and beaten from the inside out, and screamed aloud.
Why? Why won't you just tell me?
2 stout figures appeared in the mist of the rubble. They stood behind Zavala as he quietly sobbed to himself over and over. Saint and Shax looked up at the sky to see the traveler overhead. The pieces of its shell had stopped swirling around the sky for a moment and parted, making room for the light to now cover Zavala. Saint walked over to Zavala and reached down to him. Zavala looked up at Saint and saw the traveler behind him. Zavala saw the light enveloping him and Saint. The light expanded and began covering the whole area as Zavala reached up to Saint. Saint pulled Zavala to his feet and hugged him hard. Zavala collapsed into Saint's arms for a moment as the light filled them both with a new strength and energy. I was as stunned as those around me. What we had witnessed would not truly be understood by most for a long time. I turned to Ikora to get her thoughts, except she wasn't there anymore. I quickly looked around and didn't see her among the throng of people standing silently in the tower. I began pushing my way through the crowd toward the hangar. Amanda needed to hear this. It had been 3 days since the matchup of the century. Life in the tower came to a screeching halt for over 48 hours because Zavala had stepped down from his position as commander of the Vanguard. I waited for Ikora at her usual spot, multiple times throughout the days, yet she remained absent from the tower. I had a good idea of where she went, but I had more pressing matters. The transfer of power from Zavala to Saint 14 was rather simple. Saint took his place in the courtyard, handling the day-to-day operations of monitoring strikes and preparing for the coming darkness. I had yet to hear who would administer trials. Whoever took up the mantle of that task wouldn't have to do much. Zavala quickly and quietly retreated to his office. I suspect Saint will want his own space soon, and there are plenty of empty storefronts. That's none of my concern, however. With Saint now fully moved out of the hangar, I walked down to see Amanda and thank her for all she had done for us. I jogged down the stairs and caught her powerful voice resonating through the area again.
For the last daggone time, will you three just leave him alone for Christ's sake, I swear.
She looked up in time to see me coming down the steps.
Once again, you and your silly quest getting in the way of my job.
She laughed and tossed her rag into my face again. I smiled back as I returned the rag.
Just wanted to thank you for your intervention. Without you, things would have just spiraled out of control.
Nah, you were about to do something yourself before I lost my mind. I just had to make sure everyone realized who was really being hurt by all this.
She turned back to the sparrow on the rack.
Just remember us regular for the next time you go tilting at those windmills.
She pointed at Uldren.
Better go say hi to the new man around here.
I looked back at Uldren, standing back near the docking doors. He was gazing up at the traveler as people buzzed around him like a white tiger in a zoo exhibit. I cautiously walked over to him, and the civilians scurried away.
Hello, cousin. Thank you for your help. I was wondering about something.
He turned back to the traveler.
Why did you do it? Why bring me back here?
I had to forgive you.
Why?
Because.
I walked away and headed back up to the courtyard. I walked over to Saint. He was surrounded by the masses of guardians checking in from their strikes with status reports and collecting bounties. When he noticed my approach, he pushed through everyone else to hug me.
Guardian!
He proclaimed as he roughly pounded my back.
It is wonderful to see you again.
He turned back to the crowd, then leaned into me close.
I did not realize how tedious this position was. I understand now why Zavala always seemed testy with me.
He stood back upright and raised his voice again.
Come back when you have a moment and I can get away. I have special task for you. More exploration of the moon and EDZ.
I looked quizzically at him.
I will explain more later.
I walked away and headed toward Banshee's shop. Passing by Lord Shax, I glanced at him momentarily. He looked up from his conversation with another guardian to give me a slight nod before turning back. I smiled slightly to myself. That would probably never happen again. As I walked behind Banshee's shop, my pulse jumped a bit. I knew I would have to eventually face Zavala again, and I'd rather handle it sooner than later. Maybe I walked a little slower than usual down the stairs. Maybe it was just my own anxiety showing through again. I stopped just short of the closed door to Zavala's office. I could hear some mumbling in the room, so I was unsure if I should even enter. But the more I delayed the inevitable, the more nervous I got. I pushed open the door to find Zavala standing with a civilian, going over something on a datapad. I stopped just inside the door and looked around. There were boxes stacked near the empty bookcase. The walls were surprisingly bare. The maul, hammer, and shield had all been removed. I wondered if that mixtape was still around somewhere. Zavala looked up and motioned for me to enter. He looked very different without his armor. He was dressed in a simple poncho and sash with dark leather boots. He thanked the woman and set the pad on his desk. She quickly left us alone. The door clicked shut and I turned to him. We looked at each other for a few moments. I couldn't feel any anger or unresolved frustration. In fact, the silence was rather calming to my nerves. He smiled a real smile this time and walked over to a closet.
Good to see you again. I was wondering if we'd have a chance to chat before I left.
Where are you going?
Out there.
He stopped moving around inside the closet and looked back at me.
I know the last speaker resided in the old tower. That was after many years of wandering and pondering.
He reached back into the closet and emerged with a set of white robes draped over his arms, and the broken mask of the previous speaker in one hand. Zavala walked back to the front of his desk, gently laid the mask behind him, and held the garment out in front of him, allowing it to fall free.
I don't know if I'm truly prepared for what all this means, but I know that the people need hope.
He turned and set the robes on the desk behind him, next to the mask.
I'm planning to spend time in the city and outside the walls. I need to hear the people as much as they need to hear me. I'm not sure how long I'll be gone.
He looked back at the mask again. I could see him reliving the initial attack of the Red War over and over in his head. We stood there for several moments as he picked up the mask again and ran his free hand over the top of it. It almost looked like he was preparing himself to once again carry a burden that had grown heavier over time from lack of shoulders to bear it. But that's why we're Titans. We are built to carry the heavy burdens and fight the toughest battles for those who can't.
How is Ikora handling all of this?
I don't know. We haven't really spoken in months outside of the weekly security and tactical briefings, and she hasn't been back in the tower since Saint and I.
He turned back to the traveler and slowly nodded his head.
But that's not my concern anymore.
My fellow Awoken looked back at me with soft, kind eyes. Not those of a military commander. It really caught me off guard. I had only ever dealt with a steadfast pillar of strength that was the leader, Zavala. Since being touched by the Traveler again, he had a whole new aura to him.
I wish you the best, cousin. I shall be back at some point. Once I reconnect with the people and they know the Traveler is with them, I will be back to support the Guardians who stand between them and the darkness. Good luck.
He quickly walked past me and out to the door. It was time to head to Io and talk with Ikora. The jump to the Lost Oasis was shorter than I expected. I transmatted in and headed toward the Grove of Ulantan. I dispatched a couple of Taken near the entrance and looked up, expecting to see a Guardian seated on the cliff above me. But no one was there. Where else would she be? I turned and headed back to the transmat point and peeked over the edge, looking toward the cave below. Nothing caught my eye, but this was where she and I met after the tower fell, so this might be where she ended up. Io was her special sacred place. It held an energy that was peaceful and calm for warlocks. I never really understood why, but Titans aren't the most deeply contemplative guardians, so I didn't really give it much more thought. I dropped down and entered the dark cave. I expected to hear Ikora's voice come through the dark rock like a light from above. What came next was very different. From the back of the cave, I could hear a gentle weeping. It was nearly inaudible, almost as if something had resigned itself to never healing a broken bone and was destined to live a life of ongoing pain until death. I crept slowly deeper into the cave, expecting to see maybe a guardian that had lost their ghost. Instead, I came upon Ikora Ray, seated cross-legged in a meditative pose, trying to control herself. She looked up surprised at me, and tried to cover her embarrassment with the steely exterior I had always known.
Guardian,
she exclaimed, as she scrambled to her feet and tried to retreat deeper into the cave to hide her face. I leaned Izanagi's burden against the cave wall and sat down cross-legged as well. After watching Zavala's release, I finally began to understand the conflicting waves of feelings over these last several days from her.
The Traveler hasn't touched you again like Zavala, has it?
She slumped against a nearby wall.
No, and I don't understand why. At least you have your patrols, your missions. I can't leave that tower for anything anymore.
She pushed herself upright.
After the Vex offensive, I thought I had my purpose back. I built that gate and tested it over and over.
She walked over and sat back down with me.
I buried myself in the work of helping Eris, but no one really talks to me anymore. No one but you. The space between Zavala and myself was more than just disagreements about tactics and strategy. We had lost the fire that battle keeps lit within us all, and now...
I stood up. It wasn't my place to counsel a member of the Vanguard. I was a young guardian with much to learn about the light. I reached for my sniper rifle and headed toward the cave opening.
I'll still check in with you from time to time. I miss your counsel and your wisdom. You have always been a pillar of the light guiding me on this path the Traveler has for me. There is something else coming. Something hidden and devious that is more dangerous than the darkness. Be well, Ikora. Thank you for helping me on this quest.
I turned to leave.
What are you doing? What am I... Why won't it talk to me anymore? Why does it speak to you and not me?
I turned back to her and waited a few seconds.
What makes you think it has ever really spoken to me at all?
You were so calm and measured in the face of all this, I
thought that I had forgiven myself for Cade's death a long time ago. I also thought that I had forgiven Cade for being such a stupid, lovable idiot until the moment I realized that I still have work to do and people to help. But I realized I was forgiving the wrong person. I had to forgive Uldren. I'm just a Titan. Things are pretty simple for us. We punch things and then get out of the way so hunters and warlocks can do their jobs. I try not to make things more complicated than that.
I turned away again and walked to the edge of the cave and looked out at the pyramid ship hovering above the planet.
There's only one thing that I keep pondering over and over. Devotion inspires bravery. Bravery inspires sacrifice. Sacrifice leads to death.
I stopped and chose my next words carefully.
When was the last time you died, Ikora?
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much, so much for listening all the way to the end. This story, this audio drama started off as a simple idea for a book. I was originally going to write this out and hire some artists to do some images, and then I got the crazy thought, hey, what if I turned this into an audio drama, radio theater style? And here we are, about 2 years later. It all came together very, very nicely. I would like to thank all of my editors, Xanatos and Boardman, and Matias. They've all spent a lot of time and energy to bring this all together for you, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Thank you to all of the voice actors, every single one of them, and that includes the ones that I didn't end up casting. I have learned so much in this process, from the writing to the production to the overall creation and the publishing. Thank you very much, everybody. You can count on a part 2. The script is done. I have a whole bunch of lines recorded. It will hopefully be out in the fall. I'm thinking October, November, but you will find all of that information right here on the website. Please do follow this on Twitter at FanfictionMedia on Twitter. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and you can count on a part 2 and probably a part 3.